welcome to St Helens to Steve. It's really great that Steve's chosen St Helens to kick off his Ask Steve sessions. We're really pleased about that. My name's Sally Yeoman. I'm the Chief Officer at Halton and St Helens Voluntary and Community Action, and we've played a very small role in helping Steve's team organise St Helens' event. So I've come along to chair this evening, hoping that everybody can hear me. Is the sound okay? Okay, so I'm just going to explain a little bit about the format of the event. We're going to finish dead on time between 8:45. Well, that's dead on time. Between 8:45 and 9. I'm going to draw us to a close towards 8:45 so that people can get away, because it's a November evening and we don't want people out too late. So before Steve was elected in May 2017, he held a series of public meetings, and the information gathered at the meetings helped inform the pledges that Steve made in his manifesto. As he begins to implement the manifesto, Steve's back out continuing these meetings to keep you informed on the progress that he's made and to hear about issues that matter to you. So we're going to have a simple question and answer session. Thanks to everybody that's already submitted them. But what we're going to do is try, if we've got time, to take some follow-up questions where they prompt a bit of a response from the audience. So there's time for that. Steve is going to answer the questions directly. There are already some questions that have come to us that are really probably for St Helens Council, and what we're going to do is to arrange an appropriate response to those where it's not appropriate to spend a lot of time on those. So, again, just to say a very big welcome to everybody that's here. Delighted that Mary Rim has been able to join us, and really delighted that there's so many of St Helens' local residents here. Okay. So I'm just going to say a little bit about Steve, and then we're going to hand over to Steve. Okay. So Steve Rotherham was born in Knowsley in 1961 and was one of 8 children. Steve served as Liverpool City Councillor in 2002 to represent the Fazakerley ward, and was Lord Mayor of Liverpool during the city's European Capital of Culture year. In 2010, Steve was elected as the Member of Parliament for the Liverpool Walton constituency. Steve's a bricklayer by trade. He'd set up his own company by the age of 22 and later went on to work in various capacities in the construction industry. Having pursued qualifications through FE College, he studied full-time at Liverpool John Moores University and started a master's degree in Contemporary Urban Renaissance at Hope University. During this time, Steve was employed as business manager for the Learning and Skills Council. In May 2017, Steve was elected the first ever Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City region, and he's securing 59% of the vote on a manifesto that is ambitious, fair, green, connected, and where people work together. So really pleased that Steve's here in St Helens, and I'll hand over to Steve to say a few words.
This is a bit of an experiment because I'm certain that there are really important questions that everybody wants to ask, and yet there are restrictions on the role that I fulfil. I think there's confusion what a Metro Mayor is. There's confusion actually what devolution is, and there's still some confusion about what the Liverpool City region is. So just to let you know, it is the 6 districts coming together of Halton, Knowsley, Liverpool, St Helens, Sefton and the Wirral. And that gives us some advantages that we really need to push forward with, some opportunities for game-changing policies, some transformational projects, and hopefully as we go through we'll identify some of them. The Metro Mayor is not about service delivery, it's about strategy. It is about looking for those opportunities that individual councils can't do on their own. And I'll give you an example of that. We've got something in our area that most people here won't have heard of, and it's called Hartree, the Hartree supercomputer. It's at Daresbury. It's in a place called SciTech. And some people will know it. But it's the most sophisticated computer in the whole country. So it's not Cambridge or Oxford. It's not in London, it's based here. And we have a transatlantic cable that goes from Southport to Nova Scotia and then to mainland America and to China. And if we to join those two things up with a fibre optic cable, it means that we can attract global companies to come here, to set up here, to create high-skilled jobs. Because the new technologies, the fourth industrial revolution, as it's called, means that you need to push big data around and you need these systems. And no one else has got it, but we can do it. We haven't got it ourselves yet, but we can do this. And if there's some people here who will understand this, I'm looking towards you, you'll probably be left cold by this and not understand what I'm talking about. But there's a place called Chattanooga. Anyone who's my age will know that there was a song called the Chattanooga Choo Choo. It's all right, you can look blank because I don't expect that you'd know it. But there's a place called Chattanooga in Tennessee in America. And Walter Cronkite, who's the man who reported on the moon landings, he described it as America's dirtiest city. It was a post-industrialised wasteland, a city going nowhere, toxic. And he reinvented it, they reinvented themselves. A man called Mayor Andy Burke did what I would like to do for our city region, and that is he put out a tender which meant that they could have high-speed connectivity 200 times faster than the American average and connect the whole city up, all the businesses and all the homes. And that city is now gone to the first gig city, it's called, the most connected in America. It's a feeder city for Silicon Valley. And about 2 weeks ago, I did the first ever, and this is where some of you might understand this, and some of the people of my age, because certainly this really did blow my mind. I met a NASA scientist in the fourth dimension, so through virtual reality. But he had an avatar, and I had an avatar. So when we spoke to each other, but he was in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley, and I was in Toxteth in Liverpool. But we met, and we talked to each other, and he said that Chattanooga are ahead of Silicon Valley. So if they can do that without the natural assets that we've got, or the man-made or mankind-made assets that we've got, which is the Hartree supercomputer and this transatlantic link, if we can connect them up, it transforms our futures. And it means, for instance, that global companies, who you'll all know, and I won't mention any of the names, but global companies who are signed up to be carbon neutral, but who want connectivity, would be attracted to us, because the second part of what we want to do is to harness the power of the River Mersey for everybody. So not to sell it off to somebody, but to do it for ourselves. So I've put forward a proposal which is called a special purpose vehicle, in which we can claim the intellectual property rights of that and create the value so that nobody else can go and do what it is that we want to do. If we have renewable energy and connectivity, that means our speeds and our capacity is probably untouchable in Europe. You think about those big companies who are looking for somewhere to go because they've signed up to be carbon neutral. It really does open up the possibilities of us becoming one of the leading areas for tech innovation in the future. So they're the big sort of strategic things that we want to do. We'll do transport and a whole host of other things, I'm sure, during this. But, you know, it's just to differentiate between when I was Lord Mayor and I had the chain on. That's not what this is about. That's the civic mayor, and St Helens have a civic mayor. It's not about the city mayor in Liverpool that Joe Anderson fulfills. Joe's about delivering services like a leader would in a city, in a regional council, in a borough council. It's about working with government at that level to try and see whether we can get transformational change. So we'll see if we can tease some of the other things out during our conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so I've got a series of questions and I'm going to start asking them of Steve. Some of the people that have submitted them are here in the room, and we're happy to have a conversation about it with the person that's here in the room, and some of them have been submitted by people who can't make it this evening. So we're going to start off, I'm hoping, with a relatively easy question. The question's been asked from Verity Rhodes, who's the centre manager and founder of V's Place, a community centre in Prescott. And Verity asks, can you influence people in power to visit the grassroots level organisations that are doing sterling work in the community but are never considered for funding?
Well, it's a two-part question, isn't it? Yep. So about influence, but also about visiting community and voluntary organisations. And in St Helens, for instance, this is my third day, if you like, where I've visited to try and ensure that there is that connectivity, that there is the communication and the dialogue. So I've been here for 2 full days when I went round to different organisations to try and get out to as many people and speak to as many people about the issues that people in St Helens have. So can I influence people to do that? I think everyone should do it in their own locality. It's interesting you said, did you say Prescott?
I did.
But Prescott isn't part of St Helens, so it's right, part of yours. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know where the organisation.
It's not in St Helens Council.
No, it's not in St Helens Borough, but it's part of your constituency. So that's probably where the. Yeah. But I think the second part is the more fundamental issue, and that's about access to funding. And everybody that I speak to, every organisation that I've been round to, is having the same problem, and that is they can't get the amount of funding, some of them, to see them through till April, which is the new funding round. They're struggling now, and austerity is really, really biting. And I think for a while it hit the likes of councils, and they tried to manage that as best they could, but it's filtering down now to the lower tiers, to community organisations, and they, I think, are in danger at the moment of not being able to see through this period where hopefully we'll see a change of government and a change of fortunes for councils and for the voluntary and community sector. I think it's so important that I appointed somebody called Professor Dr. Ellen Loudon as a mayoral advisor, and she deals with what's called the VR6, which is an organisation that covers the 6 districts of the city region, and she's feeding into me the issues. We need to be looking at commissioning. We need to see whether we can squeeze some of the money down to a lower level. Organisations like councils and certainly the combined authority with their commissioner models can do things differently. I know the councils have all tried to do what they can possibly do. Whether we can do things ourselves that might facilitate some of this, I don't know, because we haven't even gone through our first budget process yet, that's why. But yeah, I think the work that the voluntary and community sector do, and the fact that they are the unsung heroes of social cohesion, really needs to come to the fore, and we need to be celebrating more of what they actually do for us. Okay. And I know that you're from one of those.
I am. So I can see, Verity. I don't know if there's anything just in response to that you'd like to say, Verity, or if there are other questions.
Yeah, 16 years ago I set up a club for my chronic depressive illness. Within 6 months I had 300 members. Because I'd set up expectations, I've been paying for it myself, but quite a considerable amount of money in. 16 years on, Transform Life, Inspire People, now we're getting the hospital, the GPs all coming to me, and I could do with some staff, please, and for them. So hence asking, can you try and influence the way the funding goes, because I know companies that have had plenty of money, all salaries, when the money's gone, the jobs have gone, and then they close down, and here's us still going. People can't get food on the table, they can't even have a change of clothing, so we're dealing with all that. And I think it would be nice if someone, saw what these people in your grassroots level do suffer in life. It's tragic, it really is. So thank you for listening. Thank you.
We've got another question that's along the similar vein, so I'm going to ask it now if that's okay, Steve, just because I think they fit together. So Tina Standish asks, or says, during the last year caring for my elderly mother, I've discovered that more and more organisations are increasingly dependent on volunteers to enable them to provide services for the elderly, disabled and disadvantaged. Where do you see the importance of volunteer roles within the Merseyside region, and do you think that the voluntary sector as a whole should be ring-fenced against any future funding cuts?
I'll do the last bit first because that's the most difficult, but I want to be honest about what we are facing. And of course we would all want to ring fence funding that's secured and ensured that the voluntary sector could survive from year to year. The problem is that councils get money from central government. This is how it works. So central government decide on what councils get. And with that money, there are certain statutory obligations for councils to fulfil. And a lot of the voluntary stuff is discretionary. So when the cuts like St Helens have had, with about £70 million to date and about another 20 million to find in the next couple of years, when they're hit with that, they have to and are legally obliged to deliver the statutory aspects on behalf of the government. Otherwise, the government can come in and you can stop the funding completely. So yeah, I fully understand the implications of the fact that discretionary funding is one of the first that is lost out when there are cuts. And I'll give you an example. When I was the Lord Mayor, one of the organisations I dealt with, and at the time it wasn't a well-known thing, it was the Alzheimer's Society, and my mum unfortunately succumbed to Alzheimer's, and so I did a lot to try and promote this, and there was an organisation set up and lots of volunteers and all that sort of stuff. And last year they announced that they are moving out of the Merseyside area, that Alzheimer's is moving out, when there's a massive increase in dementia and the need for Alzheimer's support. And it's because the bits of money that they got to keep going from councils, which was then supplemented by fundraising, everybody else is facing the same thing. Everybody's trying to raise money because those bits of funding aren't there, and it's made it almost impossible for them to continue. So genuinely, I do understand the whole issues about the voluntary and community sector. As I say, we're going to look at what we can do to influence it. But it comes down to one thing. This government and austerity are having a negative impact on the most vulnerable in our society. And the sooner that people wake up and see that for themselves, the better for me.
Thank you, Steve.
With the cuts in the services, the statutory body services, it's voluntary sector that's picking up the ends on that. So in the, I don't know whether short term or long term, but the voluntary sector is actually saving money. So I don't see why the voluntary sector can't get a bit of that money.
Well, it's quite simple, and it's because there is a legal obligation for councils to deliver statutory services. It's not a choice. Yeah. And so the thing that has to go first is the stuff that they aren't legally obliged to deliver. And that, unfortunately, no, I understand that the slack's always picked up. The slack's always picked up by those people who volunteer. You've seen it with libraries, for instance, and libraries are now, which used to be run by councils, are run by voluntary groups and all that. It's always that. But you're right, it's a false economy for me, because a lot of those charities who were doing work were preventing people, for instance, keeping people out the judicial system, which costs an awful lot of money in jail. Keeping people away from accidents and emergencies, all of them sort of things, which actually cost more money. But the way government works, and as you heard in the introduction, I spent 7 years in Mary's here, and she'll attest to this. Government departments don't work together. It's not a coterminous thing. They are working their little silo. So if they can save 10 bob, they'll do that, even if that costs another department £10. And that's what you've got. And until government works more cohesively, you're going to get that where everybody is just fighting for their own corner. Okay. And actually that false economy means that in the end, it's the voluntary services and those people are hit the hardest. And I said that right at the beginning. I think it's a terrible state.
Okay. Have we got just one more comment then about that? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
We all know that councils have reserves of cash. Why can't they draw out on that? They must. They use for voluntary services.
I.e., St Helens Council got a reserve of £18 million.
Can they not draw out on that for the likes of that voluntary
Okay.
and also for the school patrolling?
Yes.
So how long do you think reserves might last? You have two types of reserves, the allocated and unallocated. So there will be the vast majority of that, and I don't know St Helens, I'm just talking in general about councils, because this was a tactic that Eric Pickles tried to use, and he said, for instance, and I was the MP for Liverpool Halton, Liverpool City Council have got £100 million in reserves, but in unallocated reserves, they were at the very minimum that you're allowed by government to have to hold. The rest of it was, for instance, if actions were taken against them. So there was the equal pay stuff that they had to pay for. There was some contaminated land. There was a number of issues around contracts. There was all sorts of things that they had to have some reserves put aside for. But once the reserves are used, they're gone.
No.
Of course they are.
Listen,
what do you mean, no? Of course, if you use a reserve, it's not getting replenished. So once it's gone, it is gone. That's not an arguable point.
Listen, St Helens Council, last year, they set aside £10 million for the equal pay. And they only have to pay out £3.5 million, because they got £6.5 million over. Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Okay, so I think probably I was just going to chip in with a conversation about when you. No, sorry, I'm.
You just
I'm
had your
not,
opportunity
I'm
to
not,
speak, mate.
Sorry, I'm not closing you down. So I was just going to chip in about one of the solutions. So listening to you speak at the beginning, Steve, about the innovation and thinking differently about how we do things, because you know voluntary organisations have relied over many years on public bodies for funding, and I think we all recognise that that's not going to be the only place we can go to. And I wondered what opportunities there might be to think differently and creatively about how we bring money into the Liverpool City region that doesn't belong to councils, that isn't taking away from the social care budget, but as Mary and others, Tina and Verity have really eloquently put, you know, really is needed, because councils aren't going to be able to do it all, and we are going to need really strong voluntary and community groups to help people who are having a really difficult time. So I wondered if there was anything in terms of your influence where we can bring, whether it's big lottery money or, you know, how do we get that investment into this city region rather than just relying on the council?
The reason that I brought up about those two transformational projects is because every other city is facing what we're facing. Every other borough is facing what St Helens are facing. The whole system is teetering on the brink of collapse. So we need to look outside of that. If you've got a finite pot of money, yes, you could, even if you could and you were allowed to legally use that, you can use it for a few years, and then what happens? Because it's a finite pot of money that's not getting replenished. So it's like your savings. If there's no other money coming in and you use your savings, then your savings are gone. And that was the point that I was making. We need to be looking at where we can make a step change so that we can bring additional monies in. And so what we've done, we get some money from central government and we've put that into a pot. It's called Gain Share, the money. And we put it into a pot called SIF. And that SIF is the money that we want to invest in projects that will give us a multiplier return. So we will have a revenue stream. That means that we can do some of the things that we want to. But you have to look at investing to try and get a return on the money that we get.
And I just wonder if just so we make sure we pick up these things that might be for, not necessarily for Steve, but for the council, we'll get some of the team to make sure we're picking this up, and we can definitely make sure the council hear those questions and provide some responses.
Can I just ask a question? Has anybody thought of the voluntary sector about approaching the corporations, the businesses within the borough, getting sponsorship from businesses? Some companies do sponsor. I know that Canarf, they have a fund or something like that. But I know there's many voluntary groups. But some companies will sponsor and commit to something.
Yeah.
It might not be everything, but commit to something.
Yeah.
It's just a different way of trying. Because that, when Cameron spoke about big society, it was about people doing it for themselves, free.
Okay. So I think we'll pick that up, Mary, because it's definitely a role my organisation can play in terms of connecting the sectors, and maybe we'll use Ellen's connection to Steve to think about how we do that across the city region. I just want to make sure people feel like they've been heard and get an opportunity to ask, but I'm also conscious of the fact that Steve can't be held to account for things that he's not responsible for. So I'm going to follow on because I think there's a bit of a theme carrying on. So we've got a question from Mr. G. Pennington. What is the future for libraries across Merseyside? So Gordon's in the audience as well, so I don't know if you wanted to say anything more to that, Gordon, or get an answer to the question.
Obviously, we're trying to think differently in St Helens, and there's been lots of things going on that I've been lucky enough to be involved with. But really, what is the plan across everywhere? In Sefton, it's virtually just close them all, seems to be. That's it, they're gone. Which is similar. Yeah, there was a discussion about, when I was in Fazackley, when you were there, youth services getting involved, of taking over. No chance of that now?
I don't know the specifics of what's happening in either St Helens or here, but I was on DCMS Select for 4 years, and I went round the country looking at how innovatively they were trying to use alternatives to keep libraries open. And one of the ones that I saw was in Pimlico in London, and it might not be the ideal solution for people from our political persuasion, but they got Costa to open up a coffee shop there, and that actually subsidised the rent, which meant that they could then, with volunteers, keep the library service open. So there are lots and lots of models. There were, believe me, dozens of different ways in which people had tried to do it. But at the end of the day, this is the problem when we're talking about austerity. It should be for councils to do this. London libraries were really born in our city region, so we should protect this. And I think it's a vital service that we provide. The world's changing, of course, and not everybody wants to lend books, but there are other ways of doing that. And so there are ways in which you can lend Kindles, we have books on and all that sort of stuff. But what are we going to do for the next generation when libraries are closed down and then all they do is get their information from Wikipedia and the mistakes that will entail in their futures, believe in certain things because somebody's actually put it on a website. We want people to be a bit more to use technology, but to be a bit more questioning about the stuff that they believe, the fake news type stuff that's on there. I think libraries are a perfect solution. I haven't got an answer, I'm afraid, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to money.
Okay. Can I take us on to a different topic? Anybody else want to say anything about? Okay. I'm going to go to a question that we've received by email, and we've also had a question from a member of our audience that feels very similar. So I'm probably going to put both to you, Steve, if that's okay. What reassurances can Steve offer that the likes of St Helens, which sits at the furthest point from Liverpool and the dock area, will have an equal share of job and investment opportunities? Take that one. Let's do that one. Because there's a sub-question and it relates to the other one. Sorry.
Okay, I stood on a platform where the strapline was no borough left behind. And that's because I genuinely believed that everything needed to be distributed fairly across the 6 districts. I'm a Kirby lad, and I saw things happening in the city centre that didn't trickle down to areas like ours. When I was an MP, the MP for Liverpool Walton, and certainly even stuff that happened again, you know, with the sort of capital of culture didn't trickle down to our communities as much as we all wanted it to be. So I wanted to try and ensure as much as we possibly can that the opportunities that devolution afforded us were distributed fairly. Now, I've explained that there's this thing called the agglomeration effect where the 6 can do things that 1 can't. And hopefully people have read in the newspaper, I think it was in the local newspaper in St Helens, that we've been in detailed negotiations with a company called Talgo. And Talgo, if Talgo were to come here, and certainly they are very interested in coming to St Helens, there are hundreds, if not many more than hundreds of jobs that would be created. And they would be created purely because we've acted in a much more mature way politically and geographically. What's happened in the past is St Helens might want Talgo to come to them, but so might Sefton. And they will play one off against the other. And in the end, normally, they'll go somewhere else because they'll get to a bottom line where they can say to somebody else, I've been offered X, Y, and Z. Somebody else has offered me A, B, and C. What are you going to offer me? And that's what it is. It's like a bartering. And we've lost out. And I know of 2,000 jobs that the Liverpool City region lost out for because 2 of our districts were trying to outbattle each other. So instead of doing it that way, the 6 districts came together and we thought that St Helens was the best strategic fit. And so everybody has got behind the bid. And that will be really beneficial to this area. But not just to St Helens, it'll be beneficial to the Liverpool City region. And that's what we need to start thinking of ourselves as, because we can all benefit from these new jobs, new technology, all the things that I want to do if we start to act as 6. Manchester have done it for decades. And if nothing else, we need to be learning from what they've done to see the benefits that Manchester have got.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We've got a supplement. Just wait for the microphone and we'll take an additional question.
Good evening, Mr. Rotherham. Thank you for coming to St Helens. You sell... Oh, sorry, is it on? You sell growth as it's a benefit to everybody, and it's not. If you're adversely affected by growth and you have no redress, then your life is blighted, not just psychologically, your mental health, which is different from your psychological health, more lorries on the road, and similar, please, and I'm not, please bear with me, similar to Grenfell, similar to Hillsborough, people hide behind the law, and because the law says that it's okay, minimal disruption, that's all right. However, they don't take in the moral consideration of what growth is actually doing to residents' health and so on. And we have no redress because everywhere we go, we're told, oh, that was carried out, that was detailed, that was okay, that the actual reading didn't come above such a reading, so your health isn't going to be affected. But believe me, it is, because it's not taken as a whole. It's taken one step at a time instead of looking at everything. And everywhere you go, you're told that you're wrong. We are called derogatory names because we care about our community and about where we live and about the adverse effects that growth is going to have. And the job, we're taking a hit for growth, and nobody's listening to us.
Okay. Let Steve answer that then.
Okay. The world's population will increase by about 1 billion in the next decade, and the UK population up to 70 million. Growth is going to happen. Growth is all around us. It's how we respond to that. So there's different types of growth, aren't there?
In the right place.
Well, inclusive. Well, in the right place is always somebody not by us.
No,
because
it
no, it's hold on. Tell me somebody who wants growth, as you call it, by them.
No,
tell me somebody who wants it.
Please, it's not about that. It's about doing it correctly.
Yeah.
It's about adding 2,000 or odd lorries turning round your back door without being able to have without it being able to have a barrier there to stop the noise.
Okay, well, they're engineering solutions to an issue, right? What we're talking about is inclusive growth. And we've got the exact same, for instance, Peel, who invested hundreds of millions of pounds in what's called Liverpool 2. But because we didn't have this strategy, all of those lorries, hundreds of them, thousands of them, and if they get the post-Panamax ships coming in with 13,500 20-foot containers, they will go onto lorries as well. And you can only go up one road, which is Dunningsbridge Road, if anybody knows it, in the north, to Switch Island. And that's because we didn't strategically plan it. So that's why I said inclusive growth. It needs to be strategically planned, but growth is going to happen, and we can either try and push back on it, or we can embrace it. Look what happened in Detroit. Yeah, but look what happened in Detroit, right? When he tried to push back about any sort of development, any growth. It's a barren land. It's a ghost town. There's big chunks of it where nobody lives. And nobody wants that. So it is about getting the balance right. I understand that completely. But that's why I did say that we need inclusive growth for our city region.
Okay, so let me just, No, hang on a second. Let me just cut across you just for 1 second, because we have got about 12 questions about development and planning, and what I wanted to try and focus this question in on was how what are the opportunities for St Helens. I take your point, and we are going to move on to a conversation about how do we make sure we get that growth right. But this question really is about St Helens exploiting the opportunities in the same way that the rest of the city region might. So
I think you got the word right there, exploiting.
Yeah, but I think the residents of St Helens need to benefit from growth in the same way that the rest of the city region does. So these questions are about that. That's why I tried to group them together. We're not gonna ignore the question about growth and how that happens. I promise. We've got a lot of questions about it, and we'll come back to it. We'll give everyone the chance. So we've answered a question about St Helens and making sure that that's not left behind, and Steve's answered that one for us. And the two things that were very similar were a question from Anne Shack-Lady Smith. I don't know, Anne, if you want to ask it. Are you happy for me to ask it? But what specific proposals does Steve have to stimulate green technology jobs in St Helens, specifically the City Road site? And then the secondary question that came in by email was what's being done to promote St Helens as a place to invest in for more skilled jobs, not just a logistics hub. If you want to, Anne, do you want to say? We'll get a microphone for Anne.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Thanks, Steve. Just to come on to the point that you said a little while ago, who wants growth in the backyard? Yes, please. In the sense that that's how we grew up in St Helens. This is a manufacturing town. We've got a proud history, for glass, for pharmaceutical, for chemical, go on and on and on. And we've seen it decline since the 1980s. So we grew up with a factory on the corner of the street, and a shirt factory here, and a boot factory there, and Pilks and so on. So we want them alive, but we want them clean. We want them green. We don't want to breathe in the polluted air and so on. So can't we work in a way that brings back the manufacturing, that brings back a range of jobs? We don't just want to be a container town where the lorries are coming through and we've just got people working in sheds, basically, which are fast becoming robotics. We want to get, there's no skills there, particularly long term. They're declining. We want proper qualified jobs. We want the factories going, but we want them clean and green. And City Road's an example. It's there in this beautiful, big, shiny tower. And I don't think it's doing too much at the moment. So what specific things can you help us with on that, please?
Okay.
Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah.
Right, okay. I think everybody wants good jobs. And that's what I was saying about we are competing against Greater Manchester just down the road, Leeds, Newcastle. But forget about all them. We're competing in a global context now. And the jobs that we currently have quite easily can be done elsewhere and done more cheaply elsewhere. So we need to be looking at what the advantages are of the fourth industrial revolution. And it's a chicken and egg and a bit scary as well, because if we are at the forefront of it, then we will create those really high-skilled jobs of the future. If we're behind the curve, it could literally suck the life out of us, because there will be autonomous vehicles. There's no doubt about it. They're being developed. The reason I want this ring with the ability for it to push big data around is because Copenhagen got £15 billion worth of investment, and they haven't got an automotive sector. And it was because they can push big data around to do modelling for these autonomous vehicles. We've got an automotive sector as well, so we can build the things and test them, but we need this big data. So we're looking at what the opportunities are about being clean, green. I mentioned about the renewable energy with the River Mersey. We can be Britain's energy coast. We could for £3.5 billion, and I think the government are investing about £35 billion in a nuclear option. For £3.5 billion, they can generate the same amount of energy, but it would be clean, green, renewable, and predictable. So it's about priorities, and it's about government priorities, and that's why it's a different coloured political government than I represent with my party. But we're working hand in glove with the government every single day, and nobody, and you can go and Google it if you want, nobody will see me using megaphone diplomacy to go and slag off government, ministers and secretaries of state and even the Prime Minister. We need to be working very closely with government to see what benefits that we can get from them. But I mentioned Talgo before about manufacturing. They want to come here because, yes, there's a site for them and there's a skilled workforce for them and there's the opportunities to work with our universities and all that, but also quality of life. So you're absolutely right. Culture and quality of life and the housing offer and 1,000,001 other things all link into this. And that's where we need to build this jigsaw. We've got to get all the pieces right so that we can start to attract those big companies who will bring in the jobs that you want to see, and certainly the apprenticeship opportunities I want our young people to have.
Okay. We've got a question here. We've got a microphone. We could pick up this question here. If it's about jobs and investment, that would be great, because, as I say, this is my pile of questions about.
I have got a question in a second, but I think your aspirations are absolutely fine. Within St Helens at the moment, I think we're trying to work on a plan that's for the next 15 years. I'll be interested to understand from your aspirational point of view in terms of these jobs, how long you believe that it's going to take for those jobs to come to fruition, because they're not just going to happen. And in that regard, in terms of population, I mean, I think the population of St Helens at the moment is actually less than it was in 1980 for the reasons that you've outlined in terms of Pilkingtons and so on. And what we're having difficulty understanding is how that is fundamentally going to change so quickly when in the last nearly 20 years the population has actually declined. And if I could just finish, I have got another question which I'd just like to put to you. The Mayor of Greater Manchester has announced a new trial to generate town centres that fall under his wider remit. This is called the Town Centre Challenge. It's a pilot scheme on high-density housing and involves the 10 Greater Manchester local authorities. The scheme will involve compulsory purchase, remediation of brownfield sites, which is a #1 priority, I would have thought, for St Helens. And it also has actions to force developers to build on brownfield sites. And, you know, that is something that we all believe must happen in the town centre, because otherwise we're going to be left with lots of town centre brownfield sites that are derelict and desperately need to be redeveloped.
Okay.
So could you give us your specific views on Andy Burnham's trial scheme and whether or not LCR will adopt a similar scheme. And I'm sorry to be so long-winded.
So can I just check before you answer, Steve? Are you Mike?
Yes.
We can take that question out then, Mike, if you're happy to answer that now, Steve.
Okay, it went on to about other issues. You want me to do
I
that
think
now?
just let's talk about the growth. We are going to get to a specific conversation. We've got lots of comments about the local plan and development on site. So if we take the question that was at the outset, the comments about jobs, I think that would be useful.
Okay,
We'll
and I'll
close
come
that
back
off
to
and
some
then
of those issues later, because I know there's going to be lots of questions on the same issue. On the jobs, you're absolutely right. These aren't things that we can switch the tap on and these jobs will be created tomorrow. They won't be. But we need to think about where we need to be in 5, 10, 15 and 20 years. And that's why we need to get the infrastructure right. The beauty is, even though I'm announcing this properly on the 14th of November, nobody else can do what we want to do. So it's not like they can go and steal our idea and then try to attract the jobs that I want to attract to their places, because they haven't got the assets that I mentioned before. So it does need to be visionary. It does need to be about what the fourth industrial revolution will bring to us. It does need to be about changing our fortunes. And look, we can either carry on limping on the way we are with austerity in the backdrop of all that and hope that, you know, we might get a bit more growth from sport or from the Beatles in Liverpool or whatever it might be, but that won't last for very long. Other areas, I've told you about Chattanooga, but other areas in the world are India, for instance. Have a look what's happening in India. India are starting to gear up for the sort of things that I was talking about. It's going to be cognitive computing. There are going to be these things called wearables, so your glasses won't be just glasses. There won't be computer screens. So you'll get your computer screens through glasses in the future. Watches will be completely different. All them, well, they have to be either distributed or manufactured. If we can get the ability to manufacture, to create those jobs, I'd like them to be here. But you need that research facility, so I'm linking in with our universities to ensure that that's tied into what we're doing. And it's trying to take all of the bits that were happening beforehand, which was very fragmented and sort of scattergun, but just building that and knitting it together so it becomes a really attractive offer for inward investment. That's the only way that we're going to get inclusive growth.
Okay, so I'm going to finish that subject off now. We're just over halfway through the time we've got for questions, and I've already said we've got quite a lot of questions that really on the same topic. So I'm just trying to think about how best to do this, because I don't want to feel like anybody's not been heard. I think my suggestion is that I talk to Steve about what a couple of these questions ask, do that in a limited amount of time, and then we ask Steve to answer that, and then we take some comments from the floor. And my suggestion, I recognise it's a really important and a contentious issue for St Helens currently. We're going to try and spend 15 or so minutes, because we've got another series of questions about other topics, and I think it's important that Steve gets a chance to answer those, particularly if people are in the room. So I hope people are content with that. And I'm gonna start off by doing that. So I'm gonna let Steve know a couple of the things that have already been asked. So Mike's already asked you this, Steve, but he asked about what Andy's doing in Greater Manchester in terms of the Town Centre Challenge, and will the Liverpool City region look to implement something similar? I don't know whether that might be something you want to answer now on its own.
The Manchester Challenge?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking, I mean, as you probably know, myself and Andy Burnham are very good mates. We talk to each other on a regular basis and we share ideas. And we're looking at what we can do across the 6 boroughs, 6 districts, to try and see whether we can share some best practice about what they're doing. Their needs are a bit different than ours. As you can imagine, they've got 10, but if you think that you're distant in St Helens from the centre, in Greater Manchester, you can be almost twice as far as St Helens is from Liverpool, out of the way. So they feel particularly, if you drew concentric circles in Manchester, they feel particularly isolated. So it is, it's not just about planning. There needs to be local plans, which I know that St Helens are currently going through the process. There need to be local plans anyway. They need to link into a spatial strategy, and by 2020 we have to put that to government. So there's a lot of work that we need to do in any case, because devolution forces it to do it. So we will be looking at how we can work across the 6 districts. If you want to go on to some of the issues, because it was mentioned about brownfield first.
So I've got quite a lot of those,
Okay.
Steve, yeah. So there are lots of comments, and I'm going to mention the people in case they're here. So we've had a question from Janet Barton. I feel like you might be Janet. Are you Janet? Oh, yeah. Okay, so Janet's asked a question, very much as she's already articulated. How do you think that people who are being affected by growth... Yeah. So how do you think people who are being affected can have trust in what's happening, and how can you, as the Metro Mayor, help anybody that's adversely affected by growth? So don't answer that yet, because I think there's a similar theme in some of these questions. We've got a question from Sue Barton, and Sue says, Jeremy Corbyn said yesterday Greenbelt shouldn't be built on. Do you agree? We've got a question about from Wendy Hill. I don't know if Wendy's here. And Wendy asks about infrastructure provision and green belt release. What opportunities are there to collaborate with other towns and boroughs? Many areas are planning to take large swathes of land out of the green belt, often in close proximity to other towns and boroughs. What provision has been made to allow other towns and boroughs to work collaboratively in relation to green belt release? So won't ask all of that, but there's a bit of a theme, isn't there? How will the Mayor resist the temptation to build on greenbelt land simply to generate more council tax income? And then we've got quite a detailed question from Nick Thompson. I don't know if Nick's in the room. So Nick asked a question about, so Nick's the chair of the campaign to protect rural England. So it's a question about you want us to be a place that cherishes its natural assets, its green spaces and its heritage.
That's a quote from the manifesto.
Okay, so directly quoting from you and then asking, what do you feel is your role in cherishing our fantastic natural assets? So there's a bit of a theme there about the release of brownfield sites. What can we do in terms of getting investment to release those? There was Mike picked up some of those questions there. And then the theme around Greenbelt. So probably give you a chance to just answer those en masse, and then we can just hear from members of the audience.
Okay, if I miss any, I'm sure that those people who are here will pick me up on it. I'll do the Jeremy Corbyn thing first, because as you know, I was Jeremy Corbyn's PPS for 2 years, and I was with him on Sunday. And what the Labour Party position is that we believe in a brownfield first approach. But that's what I, as Metro Mayor, believe as well, and that was part of my manifesto. So I'm not in any way deviating from what the Labour Party policy is on this. And what can we do to ensure that that brownfield is built on first? Well, look, the difficulty is, and you know this, not all the brownfield sites in all of the places are places where the market wants to develop. If it was, the market would have developed on them. So some of that land needs remediating, and it was talked about earlier. And there's no mechanism by which to do that. If, for instance, a developer did want to go in, remediate the land, that remediation obviously forms part of the final cost of the units of the houses. So it makes it unlikely that someone's going to be able to do that and make it cost effective to remediate the land, to build on it, to sell them, to make a profit, and that's why they don't do it. So I've spoken with the Chancellor. I'm not always hopeful when I speak to a Tory Chancellor, but I said, look, there's a mechanism here by which we can help each other. They've talked about giving preferential treatment to devolved areas. So if the Chancellor was to give us a stamp duty holiday, what we could do is to remediate land. Then when those properties are sold, because we'd have to borrow the money, but when the properties are sold, the stamp duty comes back to us, which means that you can use that to remediate more land. And when they're sold, what happens is that money comes back to us. And it's only a holiday until you get the scale where I was saying before, you need that income stream, you need the revenue to come back into the combined authority so that we can keep on doing these things. And I think probably 2 or 3 years, we'll probably ask for 5, so please don't tweet that out, but we'll probably ask for more and then get knocked down. But that's one way that we can start to ensure that it is commercially viable and economically viable to start to develop on some of those pieces of land. I'm not here to answer for St Helens Council about what their policies are. I have no influence over what the elected members of St Helens Council decide to do. And to tell you the truth, quite right too. I'm elected directly as the Metro Mayor to look at the strategy of the Liverpool City region, not to micromanage what people who stand for election and are returned by the ballot box decide on behalf of their constituents or on behalf of their wards. Council tax, and somebody asked about the council tax. Council tax goes to councils, it doesn't come to the Metro Mayor. If only it did. We could do some fantastic things, but it doesn't. So council tax is retained within councils. Business rate equalisation will be a whole different way in which fiscal opportunity arises for Metro Mayors and devolved areas, but that is not in our area at the moment neither. So just to separate those two things. What was...
So I'd missed a question, but we've got Nick's question about the natural assets and how do we make sure that they're protected. Nick, do you want to... we need to probably get a microphone.
I think what I was trying to get at, and it was specifically about parks and green spaces, which are a fantastic natural asset. I recognise what you say about every local authority has to do its own thing, but different local authorities are doing different things at the moment. For example, Knowsley, very good idea that the long term, the way to protect their parks and green spaces is through a trust. Great idea. Liverpool taking a different approach and saying, well, we're going to have to sell a bit of this land off to build housing. Okay, their decision, Knowsley's decision. But isn't there a role for you in actually looking at the whole? And the whole is protecting the lovely green spaces, the lovely lungs, the green lungs, and so on. I understand what you're saying, but I do think you can have an influence in bringing out the good practices from each of the authorities and saying that's for the good of us all. But if it means stopping somebody doing something, that's a different question.
Okay, thanks Nick for expanding on that.
I do think, again, I said about the spatial strategy in 2020. With the spatial strategy comes some legal responsibility for post-2020 about some of those areas. At the moment, I have no power at all. Influence is different. I've tried, and I speak to the leaders on a regular basis, to try and steer us towards a position whereby we can start to work across the 6. So if something's working, for instance, you mentioned Knowsley, if something works in Knowsley, to try and see whether we can share best practice so they can work in other areas. But that's for individual leaders and individual councils to decide. At the moment, we are a long way away from developing our spatial strategy. In fact, it's one of those areas where resource-wise it's very, very intensive and we just haven't got the capacity at the moment.
Okay, so I'm going to just ask this because I think you've probably already answered this, Steve, but we've got a question from Neil Pye who makes reference to problems in, I'm assuming that's Greater Manchester, around the spatial framework and in the Liverpool City region around the UNESCO World Heritage status. Do you think the Metro Mayors should have planning controls devolve from Westminster with more direct powers? So
in 2020, the call-in powers sit with Metro Mayors in 2020. So it's moving that way. But you've got to develop that spatial strategy, which means that you have to have agreement with the six and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I do think it's one of those areas where we'd be better doing things more locally than a national government deciding what's best for our area. But look, there are people here who, no matter what I say, are vehemently opposed to any development at all on their area. And I get that. I genuinely do understand that. I was a councillor for 9, nearly 10 years, and I tried to represent the views of the people that I represented. And a number of those, and one of them was for a Greyhound Stadium in Fazakerley, at the most inappropriate place that it could have ever been envisaged that you'd build a Greyhound Stadium. And we opposed it because it was the wrong development. But we supported the right development. And that's, again, what I was saying before about it's not just opposing anything that's put forward, it's ensuring that whatever's put forward is the best, sometimes, of a really bad offer. Because you'll see that there are people who are developers who are looking at opportunities to develop not just here in the Liverpool City region, but all across the UK. And there are people all across the UK who are opposed to any development. We just need to try and get the balance right so it's appropriate development for the right area.
Thanks, Steve. So we've got a question at the back. I'm assuming it's on the same topic. Yeah, let's just get you a microphone. That'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you. What it was, Steve, when you just mentioned about being a councillor and wanting to represent the views of the people that you represented within your ward, and you oppose certain developments, with something like the local plans that are going on, these are very important things that are going to affect not just our generation, but the future generations of places like St Helens and Knowsley. Do you not think it would be appropriate if individual Labour councillors were able to represent the views of their local wards in the sense that they would be able to vote freely, whether they say yes or no to these local plans? Or do you think it's right that they have to fall in line and follow the Labour whip?
Well, we do have a Labour whip. I'm proud. I was a member of Parliament, and at times I had to vote on the Labour whip at times for things that I thought I would prefer not to. Not that I was vehemently opposed to, but at times. And that's what comes as being part of a political party. So I'm not against the whipping system. What I was saying before about the Greyhound Stadium, I said we opposed it, and we did. And that chimed well with the local residents in that area. But the local residents were against the alternative that we did support. And sometimes, as a local representative, you have to be brave and say, you think that this is in the best interest. You have to be a leader sometimes. That's what you're elected to do, not just to follow. And you have to say, you think that this is in the best interest of the greater good of that area. So, yeah, trying to get the best deal, absolutely understand that. But the Labour whip, like any other whip for any other political party, I thoroughly support it. And if I didn't, then I'd stand as an independent.
And that's even with the local plans, they should all fall in line with what the whip says?
I think what you do is, it's like any discussion that you have. So you have indoors, you'll have your arguments, you'll have your debates and discussions. But then when you agree a position, then you have collective responsibility for delivering that. And you can't then just shirk. I think, that this is me speaking, I don't think you can shirk away from that. That's the party political position, and you have to row in behind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve,
okay, so
one quick
just
I go back to your aspiration and your inspiration about creating long-term skilled jobs, because in St Helens at the moment there's obviously been a significant decline with Pilkington in particular. But it's just difficult to understand when our council, I think a lot of residents feel across the borough that the plans that are currently being discussed are being almost imposed on people without proper listening going on, and it's somewhat to do. we're not against development. We know that this town needs to develop. This town centre in particular needs to develop. It's desperately in need of that. But it's the strategic, broader, longer term thinking about how these things are going to happen when for so long they haven't happened.
Okay.
And it's about the six regions that you talk about. How can they cooperate with? I think there's something called duty to cooperate in the planning process. And I think we can't really see that duty to cooperate is going on, which would be for the benefit of all of the six towns you talk about.
I think we've really heard the points, and I think Steve's explained a couple of times that currently the powers don't sit with him, they're for the local authorities. But I think what we can promise to do from this evening is again make sure that those get fed back in terms of the comments and suggestions to St Helens Council, so that they can hear those too. I think that would probably be useful. Anne, I've got Anne and the gentleman here, and then Les, and then I think we're going to move on from this topic.
Thanks, Sally. Just a quick one. In support of my friend at the back here talking about parks and open spaces and so on, and councils doing different things, I believe it is a strategic issue. The parks, the open spaces across the whole city region, it's a strategic issue. The fact that we have parks and open spaces does have an impact on people's health. This is a proven thing. So from the health point of view, it's a strategic issue. From a point of view that in the decline with the austerity and the cutting back, we're due to face no rangers, for example, in St Helens. And the prospect of parks going back to a 1980s scenario is just depressing beyond belief. But as they stand at the moment, it's a free to access, democratic, open space for people who've got no money to do anything else. But they can go to the park, they can take the kids to the park. We cannot lose this. It really is a strategic thing. And I would really urge that, if you think it's a local thing, if you can up it on the agenda and get people thinking about how you preserve this whole region, having a breathing city, a breathing St Helens, a green space which is good for people that live here. That would be fab. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. We're going to take a question here. I think you've probably answered some of that, Steve, but it's just to hear that message, isn't it? Do you want to...
Thank you. Thank you for taking the question. It somewhat relates to what the last speaker and the young lady over the far side about managing growth. One of the reasons the southwest of England, as well the southeast of England, is so wealthy is a thing called connectivity. They have the London Underground, they have Docklands Light Railway, which, by the way, is autonomous. It's also a political statement by putting the steel rails down, and this has been a success for that part, because steel rails in the ground is a statement for inward investment. I've been involved with Manchester Metrolink since 1985. I was one of the original campaigners, and they got it right along the lines. Ten AGMA, the Association of Greater Manchester, they got together and they've brought in Metrolink. Metrolink carried 31 million passengers last year, of which 27% were out the car for clean area. But what it has done, what it has done is it's sucked a lot of work away from Leeds, which is their main rival, because of the tram system. And what I'd like to know from Steve, why is there no tram plans in the LCR transport plan?
Okay, so you James, sorry James, I was coming to yours, but it's connected to growth, so it's your tram question.
Yeah, but it's a slightly different
All
one.
right.
This was in response to what people are saying here.
Okay, yeah.
The question was, why aren't there any trams? And I think, James, you know better than me why there aren't any trams. And that whole debacle is really, it's left a legacy by which even talking about light rail and trams in our city region, you have to get over that hurdle first, where there was money invested and money lost. And even though you talk about a tram system, and I bet you everybody here, if you said, do you want a tram system, people would say yes. But the people where the trams were going, some people where the trams were going, kicked up huge opposition to the tram. So it is about people want things, but not necessarily where it's going to affect them. And I actually think a tram system indicates when you go somewhere that's got one, that it's a proper international city that you're going to. So I think they're absolutely fantastic things. I was a member, as you know, of the light rail and tram all-party parliamentary group for years and supported it because I do think that those things, public transport, for instance, connectivity, clean, green modes of transport, all of those things all tie into the vision that I want. The problem is, if we go back to it again, it's money, isn't it? You know, if we had money, then have we got the vision to do something like that now? Yes, we have. But we get £30 million a year from the government. That's all we get, £30 million. And we're trying to use that 30 million to see whether we can get match pots to it. And we've been I shouldn't say that word, ultra successful. We've been really, really, really successful. We've turned that £30 million into hundreds of millions of pounds each year by looking at different pots. So we would love to start thinking about where a tram system might be appropriate in the city region, but we've got to get over some of those legacy hurdles. Go on.
Okay. Although I live in Halton, which is part of yours, my offices are based in Warrington. We tried to approach the council.
Which council, sorry?
Warrington.
Oh, Warrington.
They've announced £196 million link road. For that kind of money, using new technology, which is tried and tested from an organisation called UK Tram, which is funded by the Department of Transport, we could take £196 million and build 28 kilometres of tram, which would solve a lot of the issues. We can come and speak with yourself.
Okay.
On that particular one.
Okay, thanks, James. I'm just conscious of time. I've got Les at the front here. We'll take a question, but we'll pick that up. You've got a question that's connected, Les?
Well, it's just to come back to the gentleman over there, and when they talk about people not being able to gain the right sort of information. I'm the chair of a small charity in St Helens Senior Voice. And one of the things that we've done throughout the summer, with the help of Sally and her team at the VC, is we've set up forums. The first forum we held was on the local plan, which was really well attended. And we gave our members the opportunity to meet the people who are pushing through the ideas on building on greenbelt. We've also had a forum on transport, which I've got a question in later on, and health and well-being. The point being is that when we've approached people from the council, they've been only too welcome to come along and speak to us. One of the main things that's coming along, and a lot of people haven't really tapped into it yet, is about what's happening in 2020 with St Helens cars. They're holding some public meetings in the next few months, and I'd encourage everyone to come along and listen, because it really affects everyone in their everyday life.
Thanks.
That's okay.
Well, we'll come to Jamie in a minute. Then let's do Andrew, because I think he needs to go. Go on, Andrew.
Okay. About public transport.
Okay.
Isn't it?
Go on.
Yeah. You're talking about trams and things for Liverpool and stuff, but you're trying to improve it. You need to improve the accessibility for it first. Okay. I'm registered blind and have been unable to, having trouble using the transport system because they haven't got audio description on it.
Okay. That's a good question.
And obviously, we have this service called Merseylink in the region, which is very helpful, especially for people like me. It's obviously more difficult for me to get places at the moment, especially when it's dark. So, what about funding and it's all about money again, isn't it, Steve? About funding and are there any plans to improve the service like that to more accessible for people with visual impairment?
Okay. Thank you. So Steve's
Shall-
got a
shall I-
microphone.
I'll do this about the whole issue about transport in the Liverpool City region. And we're really, really fortunate. You just mentioned Merseylink. Loads of other areas don't have what we have. So we fund lots of concessionary aspects of travel as Mersey Travel, which you'll know about. So, for instance, everybody here who's over 60 will be able to apply for a concessionary travel pass. In other areas, Greater Manchester, somebody mentioned, it's 67. So we've got the most advantageous concessionary travel scheme outside of London, and we're really struggling to be able to ensure that we continue to fund that, believe me, with the pressures that are on. We have invested £460 million in new rolling stock, and for anybody who's visually impaired, or even if it's for somebody with a buggy trying to get on and off, what happens now is that the platforms, when you spend £20 million on the platforms, and the platform and step interchange there is level. So there's a plate that comes out, and it means that you'll just be able to walk straight on, no steps. Now, for people in wheelchairs, this is fantastic, because as you know, what happens now, if you're in a wheelchair, you have to telephone ahead to another station to ask the staff member to bring out a ramp to put down, and everybody's like, this is truly about treating everybody equally and fairly. So those people who are in wheelchairs will just be able to go straight on and off like everybody else. So we are looking at all of the aspects in regard to not just complying with DDA and all that sort of stuff, but go much, much further. I committed to being a dementia-friendly city region. So even the stuff that we're doing in the stations, you'll have a look at the lines on the stations so that you know which way to go. So if you follow the green line, that'll take you one way, the blue one another way. And it's building those things in as we refurbish and introduce, including in St Helens, hopefully, new stations in the future. So we are looking strategically at it, mate. But you know that anyway, because we speak all the time.
Thanks, Steve.
I'll be in contact with you about it.
Just come for a special question. Thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
All right, mate, you carry
sorry.
on.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so we'll probably go to Jamie for the question, because it's that would be useful.
Well, we've already spoken, so I mean, I've kind of explained what we do. We've got Innovate UK funding already to develop super fast Wi-Fi in the underground, and we're looking at the different cities that have currently subways in them. Liverpool's one of the best ones in terms of the infrastructure is already there to integrate the technology fairly simply on an incremental basis. So it was just about setting up a meeting to kind of give a presentation on the technology, how it's integrated, and whether it would be good for Liverpool. That was all.
Liverpool City region.
Yeah, Liverpool
City.
City. Yeah, of course. I know.
You've always got to be a bit careful, because it is the city region. If you don't want to use Liverpool, and I know for some people who are from St Helens, it's not just St Helens, by the way. People from Southport don't even feel part of Merseyside, and some of them don't feel part of Sefton. So it is difficult to all now be bought in straight away that we're part of this Liverpool City region. But there are benefits from it, and innovation is one of the things that we're really looking at. So just 3-4 days ago, I launched some of the new buses that we've got in Liverpool, Wi-Fi connected. This is in Liverpool, but they're coming to Liverpool City region. Wi-Fi connected. They've all got chargers on them, leather seats. They'll have television screens. I mean, they're very, very different than the old buses that we used to get to the pier head when I was a kid, which never even had back doors on, used to just be able to get on and off. So things, transport-wise, we are looking very much ahead. On the underground stations, which are in Liverpool, we'll certainly have a look at what super fast broadband might enable us to do. But we'll have... Yeah, that's what I'm saying, in the tunnels. We'll have a look at that.
Thanks, Steve. Mary, is that...
Buses got audio on, like London buses?
These have got audio in as much as the bus driver, so if you're held up at something, they'll say, we're held up because of such and such a thing and all that. No, so the audio visual stuff is what Mersey Travel are looking at now. But again, it's the cost of implementation. But we are starting to look at introducing that at some of the best used bus stops in the city region.
Okay, I am just going to move us on from that subject because we are due to finish at 9 o'clock. I was hoping to finish a little bit sooner so we could have a few closing comments. We've got a final question from Andrew Wennell. And Andrew asks, oh, so Andrew's gone. Andrew's asked, we need to do more about social care. How are you going to help carers have sufficient travel time without affecting clients? It's a very quick one for you, Steve.
Okay, well, it's not part of my remit. Andrew's gone, but I think it's an absolute disgrace, and it just shows you how much this government thinks of people who are doing one of the most, I think, worthy jobs, but also one of the most heartbreaking jobs, which is to look after, you know, our mums and dads and aunties and uncles in older age, and he won't pay them a decent living wage, a proper, real living wage. I've committed as a city region to pay the real living wage. We got accreditation this week. We're the first to do that, and I'm really proud of that. But this government don't believe that those people carrying out those duties on behalf of our country are worthy enough to give them a real living wage. But not only that, they don't pay them between the visits. Sometimes the visits are only 15 minutes, and they don't pay them to travel between the visits. That's how badly paid I think those people are who are helping some of the most vulnerable in society. What we are looking at, and again, Greater Manchester have got this as part of their devolution deal, so they've got health and social care. But we're looking at what we can do to integrate ours without the devolution deal at the moment. I believe vehemently in the N in the NHS. I believe that we should have a national health service, but it should be a national health and care service as well. So we're looking at what we can do locally.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So I think, I hope people feel like they've had a chance to ask the questions that they put forward. I realised that we had so many questions about one particular topic that people might not have felt like their specific words were used, but I think we tried to make sure that the themes were picked up and answered. I just want to say again a big thank you to everybody that's come this evening. It's a really important opportunity that St Helens' voice is heard, and I think we've done that this evening. And I just want to say thanks to Steve really for being open to the questions and for coming along and spending some time with us in St Helens. I don't know, Steve, if you've got anything you wanted to say in closing.
No, well, not really, but I will thank people because it's easy to pretend that these things are an easy thing for politicians to do. They're not, and I could have hid away because I've got 2.5 years before I have to go and speak to people, don't I? Because that's what you'd all say. You only ever see a politician at election time. So I could have hid away and then come back to you and said, oh, do you know them things that I said that I was going to do? I am going to do them, but probably next time will you vote for me again? And that's not the way I've operated. I've stood on a manifesto. I'll stick to the commitments in the manifesto. I'll deliver the manifesto, and I will continue an open dialogue with all the 6 districts, people in all the 6 districts. And this is my last visit, even in the next few weeks to St Helens. I think I'm back next week again. So there are lots of opportunities. If people have got requests where we need to come and see the excellent work that you're doing or some of the issues, we'll see whether we can schedule those in. But I want to continue a 2-way dialogue. There is an email that somebody over there will tell you what the email address is because I can't think what it is at the moment. But there's an email. You can send in your questions via email. We'll try and get back to them. The one issue I'd say is if you're not getting something back as quickly as you would like, that's because we are still trying to build the capacity. People might have seen the interview that I did on Granada Reports. We're still trying to build the capacity in the combined authority. Andy, when he walked in Greater Manchester, had 300 staff. They were there. That's gone up considerably more. We walked in to 0 staff. So we are in the process of enabling the capacity to get to where we need to get to. So sometimes it's not bad manners or trying to avoid the issue. It's that we haven't got people who can get all of them, because they have to come in and I have to sign them all off, and then they go back out and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a lengthy process at the moment, but we will speed up. But apologies if anybody hasn't been responded to, and that's why I'd prefer to do this, because I can answer the questions direct. But thanks very much for coming out on a cold November evening.
Thanks, Steve.